Depression is a prevalent mental health disorder, and it increases as we age. Here to tell us more about depression in the elderly and how to get professional help is well-known psychiatrist Dr. Joe Burley. Welcome to the show, Dr. Burley. It's very nice to have you here today to talk about depression in the elderly. Can we start with, what does depression look like in the elderly?
Well, there's two questions that in many cases are good case detectors, and they are having a low mood and losing interest and losing motivation. If people have those things for longer than 2 weeks and they answer in most days of those 2 weeks, then there's a very good chance that they have depression. Now, there are a whole bunch of other symptoms, but that's a good way to get in, and because, as we'll talk about later, case detection is not easy. You know, there are a lot of people in the community, and we don't get many of them. So, so 2 weeks of feeling, and it's a bit arbitrary, right? You know, some people will get better, and many people will get better without treatment. So, but you know, I think if people are unwell for that long, and it's unusual, they should be paying attention.
Let's go back and talk about aging.
Mm-hmm.
Aging, and I know people think that depression is a part of life. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I think that's one of our culture's beliefs, you know, that as people get older, I think people expect us to be sad and depressed. Having said that, a lot of things happen to us as we get older. We get aches and pains, we retire more easily, we don't feel as motivated, and there are losses that we have to deal with, retirement and losing people and so on. And so I think people just think, well, that's just part of getting old, right? And that's a myth. It's not true. We shouldn't believe that because we're old, we're going to get depressed, or we're going to hurt more, or we're going to be more tired. Having said that, once we start to believe that, it's one of the factors I think that feeds into the fact that, you know, people say, well, I guess that's it, you know, this is how I'm going to feel. And that contributes to the onset of depression in many people.
Let's talk about being isolated, whether you're at home or in a long-term care facility. What does that look like? Does that contribute to depression?
Yes, there's a very strong correlation between loneliness and depression, and there's a fairly strong correlation between social isolation. Now, some people can be relatively isolated and not depressed, and some people can be in a crowd and very lonely, you know. But loneliness, I think, the pain of loneliness is something that is stressful and that does a lot to our body, increases inflammation, increases stress hormones, makes us tired, we lose our confidence. All those things feed into depression. So, and it's, as people know, it's epidemic, you know. It's really increasing, I think. And, you know, again, that's cultural. We've lost our nuclear families. People are more on their own. We don't live together. Families move away, kids move away. So there are more opportunities, I think, to be lonely. And, you know, I always thought, well, I should keep my friends forever. And then you get older and you think, it's not fair that I have to make new friends now, you know. It's harder.
Is it hard to diagnose depression in an elderly person?
It's hard to pick it up, okay? So people come into their family doctors, or they're in the midst of their families or at work or whatever. And we often don't, you know, people put on a front. When we do that with our doctor, we don't want to be. And, you know, a lot of seniors feel that depression is a weakness. And so we feel ashamed of it, right? So we don't want to talk about it. And a lot of many of the things that we go to doctors as we get older are physical things, aches and pains and diabetes and so on. And, you know, medicine tends to get kind of focused on those things, and depression can get lost in it because it shares a lot of those symptoms, right? You know, the feeling dull and cognitively slow and so on, and slowed down and easily tired and not sleeping as well. All those things can be related to physical illness. And so it's not easy to pick that out sometimes. And you know, sad to say, probably the average, it's at least 2 years before the onset of symptoms and when somebody actually goes for help. In many cases, it's more like 9 or 10 years. And at this point, if we look at all the people in the community who are depressed, maybe a third of them are actually getting adequate treatment.
And how can they get treatment? Who gives them treatment?
Well, that family physicians and nurse practitioners are a good place. Many family health teams actually now have social workers and psychologists who see people for mental health problems. Community counselors, so someplace like Resolve or people in private practice, and families. You know, I think if one part of the reasons we're doing this is to make people aware, you know, and so, and again, when we see somebody struggling, grief, for instance, people tend to withdraw, and then the person's on their own with it, you know, and then they think people don't want to talk about it, and so they get missed, which I think is a tragedy. So,
if it is identified as depression and controlled, there's good news. There's good news about that.
Yeah, I think if we get adequate treatment, if we get it early enough, as I said, just identifying and talking about it is therapeutic in many cases. That's all that's required. Even just talking about it with family and people who you trust and love. So that's good if you can. But you have to say, I'm depressed and I admit it, and you know. But you know, we have medication that in many cases is effective. I don't think it fixes everything. It doesn't fix, you know, loneliness or loss or divorce or grief or whatever. But it does help some of the central symptoms. And then psychotherapy, which is it's another reason we don't get a lot of people treated, because it's not very accessible, you know. Family doctors don't have time. Many people don't have a family doctor now. They have no place to start. So those are the things that get in the way of sort of people getting help. And then, of course, there are things like we're less mobile as we get older. We don't have the finances to take a cab or a bus or whatever. Maybe we're homeless. There are a lot of reasons that make it more difficult for some parts of the senior population to actually get help, even to ask for it.
Let's talk about self-care, though. It's really wonderful to think about. I can help myself. I realize I do feel depressed. This is what I can do. Let's talk about that.
Well, one thing is to keep moving. First of all, the things that we identify as things that can help ourselves, I always say, don't wait to feel like it, because one of the problems with depression is you're not motivated. And so we think, I can sit all day when I'm depressed and think, oh, I should be out walking or whatever, and then I don't do it, right? And then I feel worse. So admit that we have a problem, and then make sure we don't withdraw from friends or family. Make sure we talk about it. Make sure we have activities that keep us active. Physical exercise increasingly in many cases, it replaces medication and psychotherapy because it gets people involved in groups and so on. Diet's important. You know, we have this gut-brain axis now, and so proper diet and even probiotics have been found to be helpful in treating depression. And having a routine, I think, you know, not losing your routine. And actually, if you're really depressed, having somebody help you set up your day and say, okay, these are things that I want you to do. You're not going to feel like it. And if we just do that alone, that will often help people heal from depression in a pretty significant way.
Dr. Burleigh, 1 minute left. What would you like to say to everybody to sum up what you're thinking about in depression? Well,
it's the most common mental illness that we see in the community and in seniors. There are things that we can do if we just admit that we have it and seek help and take care of ourselves. We have to recognize, and this is one of the problems with getting older, is that we're worth it, you know. We have a lot to offer, and we're worth helping in. And if we do that, we'll contribute and we'll be much more effective in our culture and society.
Thank you very much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks very much for having me. Good thing to do.